This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a busy year for economists, especially the last several months, as there's been a lot happening at the federal level. In Arkansas, there's been a lot to watch too. I caught up with Walton College economist Mervin Jebaraj to talk about some things happening in the Arkansas economy, but we begin our conversation with a tribute to a legend of the business college. Well, Mervin, let's begin with a conversation about the passing of Doyle Williams, the longtime dean of the business college at the University of Arkansas. What is his legacy?
Well, I think, he's had a pretty significant legacy both on the University of Arkansas and as a result the state. You have to remember that while he was dean was when the Walton College got $50 million, which at the time was the largest cash gift to any U.S. business school. Which made us the Walton College of Business, which significantly, almost immediately improved our national rankings as a university, allowing us to attract higher caliber faculty and staff and students. And we've set up with that money research centers that again provide a lot of value to the state, to the region, and the country as a whole. And then there are two very significant events that started under his leadership. They're both statewide events. One is the Arkansas Business Hall of Fame. That's in Little Rock every year. That draws, again, a statewide audience to it. And the other is the one that my center puts on, the Arkansas Business Forecast Luncheon, which, again, happens here in Northwest Arkansas and draws about 1,000 people every year. So, the entire state has certainly benefited from his leadership, from his time at the Walton College. And, we will dearly miss him.
Well, thank you for those words there. I wanted to get that on the record. It was important for people to understand the power of his legacy there. Let's talk about the state's first quarter. It is in the books now for the fiscal year. We're about $245 million above budgeted forecast there. So we're on pace for another potential big surplus here. The governor and the legislature are talking about doing some pretty dramatic tax cuts, lowering that top income tax rate from 5.9% to possibly as low as 4.9% in a special session. Are we ready for those tax cuts?
So, I think I'm going to try to give you two contradictory answers, and the answer is yes and no, if I can do that. So, on the one hand, I think it's important to remember that there has been quite a significant change in Arkansas revenues in the last year, and some of that might actually be temporary. So, we've never had a surplus, for example, during a recession, but we did in the last year, only because the federal government stepped in with a large amount of money. So there were several $1,000s sent directly to families across Arkansas. And people went out and spent that money at their local businesses, shopped online, and paid online sales taxes to the state. That will eventually normalize. We won't see that level of spending persist because you have to assume that at some point the federal government is going to stop sending those several $1,000s in direct cash payments like they did during the, as part of the pandemic aid packages. Another piece of that was that there was a $600 a week unemployment insurance boost and a $300 a week unemployment insurance boost earlier this year. All of that has come to an end. That was also greatly increasing spending in Arkansas. Those programs are gone, so I would assume that the surplus associated with those types of payments will also go away. The flip side of all of that is that the state does necessarily conservatively forecast what revenues are going to be. Because those revenue forecasts are used for budgeting, and it's a lot easier to budget to a lower amount than to have budgeted to a higher amount and then cut back on programs that you said you would fund. And as a result, the state has, beat forecast estimates since about early 2019. So it's actually been a fairly long time since we beat forecast estimates. So the question needs to be asked if maybe we are forecasting maybe too conservatively, and we should, up our revenue forecasts going into the future so the state, during the regular budgeting cycle, has a more accurate picture of what revenues are going to look like. And then the legislature can make decisions about what the greatest bang for the buck could be in economic development, at least through my lens for economic development. And as we've mentioned several times, it's obviously politically very catchy to hand out a tax cut or reduce taxes. But in the economic development world, talking to business leaders or site consultants or anybody else, often what comes up is education levels in our state, workforce development efforts, hard infrastructure, broadband, and those types of activities. So we do have additional revenues that we expect to get consistently and are not a one-time surplus like some of this could be because of the additional federal government spending. Maybe we do need to consider what the highest best use of that permanent increase in state revenues is, and whether that should be workforce development and education and childcare, or whether that should be tax cuts.
Yeah, give me a one-handed economist so that he can't say on the other hand.
We have fingers.
All right, fair enough. Fingers there. All right, let's talk about one of the other things they're talking about doing in terms of tax reform is what they call smoothing out these income tax brackets. They're basically going to eliminate the bracket between $23,000 and $82,000. So there'll really just be kind of two tax brackets, one below $82,000, one above $82,000. I guess, is that good policy?
I mean, I think it's, the easier it is for people to think of their taxes in the same way that the federal tax brackets are set up. It's a lot easier to think of it all the same way. So eliminating taxes does end up with sort of a cliff effect on either end, where you suddenly have removed the intermediate tax brackets, and all of a sudden, it's a hard cutoff at $82,000. Which, again, is a number just because where the bracket is today, but the median household income, for example, in Arkansas is just around $50,000. So, again, these are design issues. It certainly is nicer to have more of a progressive income tax bracket. So you have several brackets, so people with lower incomes are paying less, and people with higher incomes are paying more. Administratively, of course, for the state, it might be just easier to have a single break in the tax brackets, but I think what we care about is how people pay and how much they're paying, more than the administrative burdens on the state.
But the goal is zero income taxes, right?
Again, as I'd hinted or didn't really hint, as we talked about earlier, Texas does have zero income tax. The reason they're our biggest competitor is they have much larger metro areas than we have. They have much better infrastructure than we have, and they have much higher educational attainment and much larger metropolitan areas that sustain the Texas economy. Obviously, they have energy revenues as well, oil and gas and such, that make up the state budget. They have higher sales taxes and property taxes. So, I don't know that necessarily a zero income tax is what's going to make Arkansas economically competitive. What's going to make Arkansas economically competitive is improving the standing of our workforce, compared to our surrounding region, improving educational attainment in our state, which continues to be one of the lowest in the nation, improving workforce development efforts. Often when Arkansas has missed out on, large companies choosing to locate in Arkansas, one of the concerns has always been, not tax levels or incentives, but whether we could find a well-trained workforce in Arkansas. So obviously those investments, I think, have the greater value for long-term economic prosperity in our state.
So how does Tennessee do it on not having income tax? Because they're not like Texas in terms of having those energy taxes there, but I mean, are their metro areas just that much bigger? How does it compare?
They are a much larger economy than we are, and when we think about large metropolitan areas, we do have two large metropolitan areas in central Arkansas and northwest Arkansas, but we don't have what a lot of other states have, which is a single city large single city driven large metro area like a Dallas or a Houston or a Nashville or a Memphis. Little Rock is about 200,000 in population. Fayetteville is the second largest city in the state, and it's only about 90,000. And that pales in comparison to some of these other large cities that are driving the economies of those states.
Are there any economic repercussions to congressional redistricting? I've heard this argument out there. I'm just curious as to what you think.
Obviously, I think our state for a long time has been a very rural state, is still, compared to a lot of other states, more rural than other states. But as we've seen both in the 2010 census and in the 2020 census that we've gotten data for, Only about 22, 23 counties out of the 75 counties in our state are growing anymore. Only about 14 of them are really growing outside of the margin of error, so all of the growth is concentrated in urban areas in our state and not so much in the rural areas. So the growth is concentrated in northwest Arkansas, in the central Arkansas metropolitan area, and in northeast Arkansas around Jonesboro. So we sort of have this rural-urban divide in our state where the urban areas in northwest Arkansas, central Arkansas, and northeast Arkansas have a different set of challenges than the rural parts of our state. So the level of investment or the kinds of investment that urban areas that are growing in our state need are very different from what the rural areas in our state need, which is going to be things to keep them from losing population, investments around more agrarian economies or things around natural resources and tourism. And that's very different than what the economies of northwest Arkansas, northeast Arkansas, and central Arkansas need. So I think what we've seen in the redistricting is northwest Arkansas has become more compact. So it now pretty much only includes the large metropolitan areas, going from Fort Smith up to northwest up to Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, Bentonville, and so up through northwest Arkansas. And northeast Arkansas, obviously Jonesboro is still a much smaller MSA and is part of a much larger, more rural congressional district, but it would have been nice, obviously, to get central Arkansas to be a more urban district, much like northwest Arkansas has ended up. And that allows central Arkansas's issues to be taken as one instead of trying to divide the attentions of congressmen between, I think the way it's been split is one of it is still a more urban district, but two are a lot more rural districts, and those issues compete with each other for attention.